Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the 5 pillars of a great onboarding program. My name is Stephen Turner, and I work here at HR On Board as part of the marketing team, and I will be your host for today's session. I have the great pleasure of hosting today's webinar with Peter Forbes. Peter is the CEO and founder of HR On Board and has over 20 years experience in HR, working with Australia's leading organizations and helping HR teams create amazing new starter welcomes. Take it away, Peter.
Thanks, Steve, and hi to everyone on this beautiful Tuesday morning. Well, it's kind of sunny here in Melbourne. My name's Peter Forbes. I'm the founder and CEO of HR On Board. And today we're going to be talking about some of the basic principles and things we've learned through our history about what really compromises a great onboarding experience and program. Forgive my voice, I'm battling a cold at the moment, so I've got my cup of lemon and ginger tea next to me. It should be good. Okay, so let's get started. Look, I think, first of all, what I want to talk about is we kind of all love to have engaged new hires, people who fit the culture and share the vision of the company. What I think HR needs to do is speak more in the business terms, and really what the executives want to know when it comes to onboarding is some of the more commercial outcomes. And I think here what we're showing is the bottom line of amazing onboarding experiences. And I think there's kind of two outcomes what you're trying to do here. One is increasing new hire productivity. And I think, getting people ready to do their jobs quicker is a really great business outcome. It's a little bit of a subjective measure. One of our challenges as an onboarding vendor is how do we demonstrate some of these ROI statistics? But time to productivity and getting people ready to do what you're hiring them to do is essentially what onboarding is about. The other key metric is increasing new hire retention. It's well known that the costs of recruitment, it's really expensive to replace a new starter who leaves in the first 12 months. And really what great onboarding programs do is drive down that attrition rate of new hires. And really, if you come back to the executive and to the business with these types of metrics, that they'll sit up and listen to make the case for a great onboarding experience. In this webinar, we'll go through a little bit more of the deeper metrics that HR are more interested in as well in the onboarding process. So the topic of the webinar is about the 5 pillars, and let's have a look at what they are. And onboarding is more than just paperwork or an induction and training program. In our research, we've talked to hundreds of organisations about their process, and we've come up with these key pillars or principles, if you like, to consider when you're building a great new hire experience. And when you're building these programs, what we're saying is make sure you've considered these principles when you're mapping out the activities, the content, and the experiences for your new hires. Here at HR On Board, we use these 5 pillars to drive the way we develop our products. We look at how the features we're adding reinforce these pillars. And it's something that's been really valuable to us and something we keep kind of sanity checking as we're talking to whether it's our existing customer base or new organisations who are talking to us. And in today's webinar, I'll take you through these pillars, explain why each one is important. I'll talk about examples of what they actually are and what you can do in those pillars, and then talk about some of the companies that are doing these things well as, and show you some real life examples, because I think that's really important. A lot of organizations get ideas from what other companies are doing. And it's really interesting. Onboarding is one of these spaces that there's a whole lot of different approaches you can take to them in terms of the content and the actual how onboarding experience manifests in your organization, because different industries need different things. But I think when you look at these pillars, these span any industry, any size company should really be thinking about these kind of basic principles. So let's get into it and go to the first one, which is kind of getting the basics right. And look, your engagement dies. It may seem obvious, I guess, but a lot of organizations spend a lot of time on streamlining the recruitment process, building engagement and showing culture, only to drop the ball once you're ready to send that formal job offer out to that candidate. And really, your engagement dies the minute you ask new hires to navigate a bureaucracy of forms and enter information they've already captured. So really, the first pillar is just to make sure that the hygiene pieces work. This hygiene or compliance side of onboarding might not be engaging, but it needs to be executed flawlessly, with all the information flowing seamlessly to your other internal systems. So let's look at what the basics you need to cover in this first pillar. So we have a lot of different things here: offer creation, employee provisioning, systems integration, and audit and security. And really, these are the main core activities that happen to get that offer out, to get an offer accepted, and making sure that all the paperwork and all the processes that happen internally are ready for that new hire when they step in on day one. And look, a good example of this basics, getting this basic but sometimes very complex process is one of our customers, Threadbow. They're a ski resort, obviously. They do a lot of seasonal hiring with hundreds of people a year in many different job roles. What may seem like a basic process and getting the offer out, getting it accepted, pushing that data into payroll, can get really complex when you start adding things like award interpretation, what entitlements they're allowed, location management, rostering. That adds to the complexity of putting together the offer for the right types of groups of employees. And managing a volume of hiring, particularly when it's seasonal, creates a huge headache for the back office. So Threadbow is a really good example of where they've managed this basics. They've got the offer management really, really streamlined. The information goes straight into their payroll system, into Procedure, and it really makes that first touch experience for the employee really nice. Another of our customers, Ridges Sydney Airport Hotel, for example, they've had that maturity in getting the basics right. And, their record is sending out an offer, having it accepted, all the information provided, and the information into their Procedure system in 90 minutes. That's 90 minutes. I don't know, how many other companies can lay claim to that, just that streamlining of that offer hygiene or that new hire hygiene. So making sure you get the basics right with offer management, provisioning, and data capture, it really puts you in a great position to find the time and put the business case forward to focus on the other areas of your onboarding program. And I think, getting the basics right just allows for that foundation. So assuming you've got the foundation right, what's next? The next pillar we talk about is onboarding is a team sport. And I love this sort of principle because I think it's often overlooked at companies. Our belief is real engagement comes through relationships. In particular, the small group of people that new hire will be working with day in and day out. And that might just be a team of 3 to 10 people in their particular area or functional responsibility or project. And look, they say people leave their managers, and I think a lot of new hire attrition in the first 12 months can be attributed back to a lack of team relationships. And what we say is the team and the team leader really need to be part of the onboarding experience. Each team has its own quirks and culture, And you need to allow the team to express that in your onboarding program. So what does that actually look like in terms of activity and content? So some of the type of things you can do to support this pillar include things like a team welcome message before day one. And this is something we do really well in HR Onboard. We allow team leaders to send out, we basically send out a text to team leaders, and we allow them to leave a message for their new starter and upload their photo. And that's something that really starts creating that connection with that team leader, who they may have met in the recruitment process, depending on the industry. Sometimes they haven't met that team leader. So getting that, that point of contact with your team leader before day one is really important. The other things you can do is a buddy program, and that's assigning someone who's not the team leader, to be their buddy through those first couple of weeks in that new job. And that's a really great way to foster the relationship, to get some of that, the next point, which is around team authored content. The buddy kind of fills you in on all the sort of little terminology and nuances about that team you're joining, that there's no way that a formal onboarding or induction program can capture that in any shape or form. The other one is CEO welcome messages. The welcome messages, getting execs involved in the onboarding process is really important, and we'll look at some examples where that happens as well. But the ability to really get both the team you're joining and then even that executive team involved in your onboarding process is really important. Couple of companies that do this really well. Netflix. Netflix Netflix did a cultural slide deck that went viral a little while back, and you can find it on the internet. It's a slide deck that talks about their culture and what they stand for. They showed this in the recruitment process. But what they do, they do a couple of things. They assign a mentor to every new starter. And two, everyone meets the CEO and senior team as part of their onboarding. So, Netflix has got thousands of employees, but each new starter gets a chance to meet either the CEO or someone in the executive team. Another thing that's really cool that Google does that you may not have heard of is what they call their just-in-time alert to team leaders. So on the last slide, I did talk about there was a team leader prompts. This is what Google does. It's really simple. And while I've picked on, some big brand type companies and showing what their onboarding process is, none of these practices are really expensive to implement. So what Google does is they send an SMS reminder on the Sunday night. Usually most of their new starters start on a Monday. They'll send a reminder to the team leader on the Sunday night via SMS to remind them about 5 things they need to do with their new hires. Those 5 things are here. Have a discussion about roles and responsibilities. 2, match the new hire with a peer buddy. So set them up with a buddy. 3, help the new hire build a social network. So again, this is relationships. 4, setting up the onboarding check-ins once a month for the new hire's first 6 months. So managing that probation period. And 5, encouraging open dialogue. So they send those 5 points in a text message to the team leader the night before the new starter starts, just to remind them what's going on. And they found that simple reminder alert email, reduced new hire time to productivity by a full month, or a 25% faster. And that was a huge benefit. And, Google's a good example in terms of measuring outcomes because they're very big on data-driven decisions. So that's a great example of onboarding as a team sport. So the next pillar is about thinking about how people experience and interact with the company during the onboarding process. And how do you really make that emotional connection with the new hire? Because really, they talk about purchasing decisions and connecting emotionally with people. And it's the same with starting at a new job. How do you really connect emotionally with that new hire to your organization and brand? And I think when you're building a program, taking into consideration how you make the new hire feel is really important. So let's look at some of the things you can do. The big one is about highlighting cultures and values. This is just a big one. And look, a lot of businesses do this fairly well anyhow. In terms of, in the recruitment process, it's all about what's our vision, what's our core values, how is our business changing the world? And there's been a lot of research and a lot of, thought leadership about aligning your culture and values with prospective candidates. But, usually recruitment's good at doing this, but how does it flow into the onboarding process? And just a pop quiz for anyone who knows which big tech company's vision is belong anywhere. Took Steve a couple of guesses to get that one. Anyway, we'll leave that to the end. If anyone knows, raise your hand. Pre-start interactions. So these are things you can do to really connect that emotional value with your new starter. So what can you do before day one? An example here at HR Onboard, what we do is we invite people to our Slack channel before they've started. Slack is our instant communication type tool that replaces email and is like your networking platform internally. We actually invite people to a Slack channel once they've accepted their offer, but they might have 3 weeks before they've started. But really what it does, it gives them time to listen and if they want to participate in any of the channels on Slack and get that, but it gives them a real good feel for the organization. What are the conversations going on? How are the different groups interacting? The group that they're joining, whether it's development or customer success or sales, how is the conversation flowing? What are they talking about? Who are the people in those teams? So it's a really great way of just getting them in at a light level. Activities and tours, I think when you're building an onboarding program, really thinking about not just digital learning and content, but how you're getting people to interact in the physical world is just as important. So it's really, really important you think about that. And then it's about meeting with key teams and execs. We've already spoken about how Netflix does this, but there's a couple of other examples that we can have a look at on the next slide. So a couple of examples here. Again, I've chosen a large company, Australian company, Atlassian. You might not recognize their new logo. Atlassian does something pretty outrageous. What they do is they give every new hire a pre-start vacation. So new employees are given a travel voucher to rest and revitalize prior to commencing their role. If they're global new hires, Atlassian also fly them across to Sydney for their induction boot camp. So really, and sometimes people, if they're from Amsterdam or the US or somewhere, they see that as a second holiday. So imagine having new starters coming into your business on day one and they've already had a holiday on your dime. I mean, just that building that connection with your brand and your values is amazing. But not everyone can afford what Atlassian does. So, others, you can still do things that have a great impact. One of our customers here in Victoria is Cardinia Shire Council. What they do is they really build this strong interaction with the CEO. So the way they've structured their onboarding program is that even from the offer is all coming personally from the CEO. And that first touch point where you get the offer, there's an embedded video from the CEO in their onboarding platform. But then even once they've arrived, it's then followed up with a personal welcome from him. So the CEO meets all the new hires. And that's, again, in an organization of over 500 to 1,000 people, that's a really nice personal touch. And it's building that connection. So people understand, really what the company is about and what they stand for. It's a great way of connecting. So let's have a look at our next pillar. And this is about being personalized and on-demand onboarding. So what we say is people are different and they engage in different ways, and that's okay. Employees, especially millennials, expect a unique experience targeted directly at their own personal preferences. One of the big challenges we have here when building onboarding platforms and solutions is accommodating for the unique preference of new hires, because really they cross all demographic, cultural and socio-economic boundaries. So it's really, you can't, when you're building onboarding solutions or building onboarding programs, you can't pigeonhole your entire workforce into a particular category. Also, teams and roles are unique. So a great onboarding experience should reflect that. So how do you make your onboarding program feel unique and relevant? Good ways of doing this is job-specific content. So, onboarding content should be relevant to the job you're doing. This is a real challenge for HR teams with the current tools they use, because it's time-consuming, it's hard to know what resonates, and usually they're not the subject matter experts for those particular areas. And look, this relates back to our pillar of onboarding as a team sport and getting the teams to author their own onboarding content. The other part of this is how you make it unique and relevant is contextual information or contextual content. Sending a 100-page PDF induction booklet before day one is not the best way to get people engaged with your brand. What you need to do is understand what content and activities are relevant at what time, which allows you to drip the important information first. We have this saying internally, which is about just-in-time information or need to know at that time. You also need to consider the ability for new hires to discover information as they want to discover that information, or how you can incorporate smart recommendations into your program. Making sure information is relevant to their context and location makes the experience feel personalized. In our platform, we provide directions to work, places around them that we grab from Google about what might be good for lunch and cafes, relevant to their work location, to make sure that make the new hire feel like the program's tailored to them. But something like directions to work doesn't really matter once you've been there for a day or two. So this is an example of it's contextual. As before I've started my first day, I really care about how do I get to work, public transport, drive, how much time does it take? But after a day or two, I don't really need that information. And the last bit about unique is relevant is, you guessed it, mobile enabled. You probably hear this a lot. You need to make your onboarding program convenient and accessible. And look, we believe this as well. We back it up with the statistics we see through our platform. So one of the big statistics we monitor is what platform people are accepting their job offers on, and over 30% of new hires accept their offers on tablet or mobile. And that's a really big stat. So what you need to consider in your onboarding programs is any digital assets that you have should be consumable on tablet and mobile, and content should be broken down into bite-sized chunks. We often talk about our onboarding app being a buddy for new hires and a coach for team leaders. And I think it's really important when you're building your programs to consider that convenience for the new hire of when they need to see onboarding information and when they don't. The other side of this is for team leaders. A lot of our research suggests HR has a real struggle getting team leaders to adopt any onboarding practices because team leaders are busy with their current job and they don't have a lot of focus and motivation to spend on onboarding new hires throughout the first 6 months of a new hire's time in an organization. So how do you make your onboarding content and activities for team leaders really easy to access with minimal distraction from their day-to-day? So a good example of unique content is one of our customers, which is Event Hospitality and Entertainment, or EVT as we know them. EVTs are an umbrella company that has a lot of great brands underneath it. So they have cinemas, the Greater Union Cinemas, they have hotels, Ridges and QT hotels, and resorts like Thredbo. What they've done is they've created a dedicated site that you can go to called totallyintoit.com.au. And it basically allows new hires to hear and see real people in roles like the ones that they're about to join and do. It's very mobile enabled, so you can go from your mobile and you can read interviews with real staff about their job and even the career paths that can lead into. And while this is useful in the recruitment process, and they obviously promote this in the recruitment process, they also surface this again in the onboarding program with links relevant to the role that particular person is joining. But it's a great way of creating, unique content that's personalized down to the individual roles in a particular area, like a cinema or a hotel. They have a QT hotel has a great role. Is it called the Director of Chaos?
Director of Chaos.
Director of Chaos, which is basically a concierge, but they call it a Director of Chaos, which I love. It just shows that culture and it tells you a little bit about the role already. Even if I didn't really understand what a concierge does completely, Director of Chaos hints towards it and shows that sort of personality of the role. Okay, so our last pillar in onboarding is really it's a really important one. It's about making sure the organisation is getting value from onboarding and ensuring we're constantly evolving and optimising our practices. In my conversations with onboarding teams, it's really hard for them to produce hard evidence on the effectiveness of their onboarding and whether it's being done well or not very well. And the ability to monitor and improve processes is done very subjectively. And I think, it's trying to understand how effective is our onboarding, what the engagement looks like is hard to measure. So when you're building programs, thinking about how you can measure the effectiveness is really important. And let's have a look at some mechanisms you can put in place. So there's a couple of things we'd recommend here. Getting new hire and team leader feedback is really important. So you should have mechanisms to allow feedback from both new hires and team leaders. And ideally, at multiple points along the way. In HR on Board, we asked for feedback from our new hires that can be sent anonymously to the HR team, and we'll show you some examples of that a little bit later on. Early warning indicators is a really a good thing to think about, and so think about how you can add early warning indicators into your program. So highlighting when new hires might be in trouble, or when team leaders aren't doing what they should be doing. I'm a real big fan of sort of managed by exception in the onboarding process, because I think, as HR practitioners who are building these engagement and onboarding programs and experiences, really what you care about is when people aren't doing what you want them to do, not when they're doing it. When everything's, being followed by the book, or they're engaged in the program, things are great. What you really want to know is the exceptions. what we've done in our platform is we've added an app engagement indicator. And this basically just gives a really simple rating of good, bad, or meh, or neutral against new starters. And we measure that, we come up with this rating based on a whole range of indicators and signals, including the number of time they've logged into the app, how much time they're spending in the app and on different things like content and tasks, what tasks they're completing, what content they've viewed, their interactions with other people in the app. And while that's not a foolproof mechanism, it gives you a guideline to quickly know whether there's someone maybe you need to address and go to and see if they need additional assistance. The other piece is onboarding analytics. This is a really interesting topic. At the beginning of the webinar, we spoke about two of the big metrics, which is time to productivity and retention rates. And I think they're the two big onboarding metrics that executives will listen to. However, there's a couple of number of more discrete analytics that you can start to look at in your onboarding process to try and measure the effectiveness of your onboarding and knowing what areas you can improve. And let's talk about a few of those. So these are some real stats from one of our well-known retail customers. We're a true software as a service solution. So we basically have a data warehouse of aggregated data from all of our customers. So we've got probably over 150 brands in our data warehouse with tens of thousands of new hire data that we can analyze. And this is what we present back to our customers to see the effectiveness of what they're doing, particularly around the offer management piece of onboarding. And we break it down. So what you're looking at here is, the number of new hires per quarter and then an all-time number. And then we basically break it down into the hours each individual offer spends, the average hours an offer will spend in the internal team creating and reviewing that offer. And then once the offer goes out to a new hire, there's kind of three distinct phases where you're actually waiting for the new hires to log in and view their offer. The new hires then completing their offer, and then what we call post-acceptance, whether that's any additional pieces of information or forms you need the new hire to accept. Once that offer's been accepted by the offer, it then goes to payroll for processing. So that gives us an overall average hours to process a new hire. And in this example here, you can see overall in Q3, it was 92 hours for that end-to-end process. Q4, it bumped up to 103, and on average, it's about 95. So analytics is always an interesting one because sometimes you get assaulted by numbers and you're really like, yeah, so what? What does this mean? So the insights I get from this is that the overall time to onboard went up in Q4. That's great. That's pretty simple. So what improved and what didn't improve? If we look over with the internal team, we can see the time to create offer and review offer improved between Q3 and Q4. And when we drill down on this with our CS team and with the customer, when we present this back to the customer, they actually go, oh, actually that's because we had new staff members in our recruiting team come in Q3. They weren't familiar with the recruitment process. They weren't familiar with our onboarding practices. And this is really showing the improvement of them getting more familiar with our onboarding practices between Q3 and Q4. So we've had some internal efficiencies. So that explains that improvement in the reduction in time to create an offer. We also see, though, that's a good improvement, but we also see that the time with the candidate to accept the offer increased. And look, they're not quite sure why that happened in that quarter, and it's something we need to keep an eye on. So it gives us some interesting info. So now let's look at the next piece. how we compare to other, our benchmark type of data. So we provide information about what's happening internally within that particular customer, but how does that benchmark across all of our customers? So this slide is basically showing you, this is the same customer's info, a large retailer, and now we're showing you the percentage of time in each stage of the offer process compared to all of our customers. And again, what's actionable here? This is again, okay, you show me some great data, but you know, how do I get some business value out of it? What we can see here, some of the interesting data here is that the time to action an offer, so the time it takes for a candidate to log in and view their offer is a lot longer than our average. 28.4% of the total time of the offer process is spent just waiting for someone to log in and view their offer. How is that actionable? What we could do, what this allows us working with our customers to do is we could add in some extra notifications to remind people that they have an offer there waiting for them to go in and accept. We could change the wording of the text message and the email and the call to action to make it more urgent. Because a business, particularly in a retail environment where they want to really that speed up that time to recruit process and make sure people are approving their offers or accepting their offers quick, they could change some of the messaging around that. We also know from our analysis of our database that we know offers are more likely to be accepted between 2 and 3 p.m. on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and also most offers also get accepted on Sunday. Now, Sunday is kind of obvious about why people would accept on Sunday. I have no idea why offers are more accepted between 2 and 3 p.m. on Wednesday and Thursday, but that's what our data tells us across all of our customers. Really interesting. So a way to reduce the time it's sitting in people's inboxes waiting for them to accept their offer is they could change the time when they send the offer out. We also see that the time to collect info is slow. So this time to complete post-acceptance is more than double the average across our database or our customer base. And this may be because we're asking them to complete too much information in the onboarding stages. So if we really wanted to get that information quicker through to our internal systems, we might think about, have we got too much we're asking those new hires to accept and complete before they do that on day one. But really, the other question here I'd ask is maybe the benchmark is wrong. Maybe this particular retail customer is more mature than our other customers in terms of they're collecting a lot of information before day one. Therefore, they're increasing the time to productivity when that new starter arrives on day one. So that might not actually be a bad stat. But what these stats allow you to do is to really question some of your processes, and you've got some measurements, and it allows you to optimize and make changes and then measure that impact. We see for this particular example that the time to for payroll to process the offer is well below our customer average. And that's because this particular customer is using straight-through processing from HR Onboard into their Procedure payroll system. So there's no rekeying, it just goes straight through via a web services integration. So that's some really interesting insights you can get through analytics and help you drill down on how we can improve our onboarding process. The other part is new hire feedback. New hire feedback, we mentioned getting feedback through the onboarding process is really important. And you get both the good and the bad. I've shown the good here, but believe me, you also get bad feedback from your new hires sometimes. Most of it is to do with the onboarding process itself, in terms of you asked me to provide too much information. I didn't understand these things. So it's really important that you have a feedback mechanism in your onboarding journey so you can continue to optimize your programming processes. So I hope today you've learned more about what you need to think about when you're building or improving your onboarding program. We think incorporating these kind of 5 pillars or principles, if you like, into your onboarding will ensure you're creating amazing new starter experiences and driving better outcomes for the business. Certainly in our discussions with companies, the current systems and processes that people have around onboarding, it's really hard to support these principles. Our goal as an onboarding vendor is to provide you with the tools and the knowledge to improve onboarding. So what we do is we continually reference back to these pillars when we're building our onboarding platform. And we've incorporated a lot of these principles and features into our products. So thanks for your time today, and we'll take some questions. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Peter. We have just enough time to go through 1 or 2 questions. The first question we have here is, Pete, how have you seen organizations go about getting teams, and especially team leaders, involved in the onboarding process?
Yeah, look, it is a tricky one. Again, the feedback we get from a lot of organizations is getting team leaders involved. I think it is a combination of carrot and stick. I think part of it is increasing the awareness of what the effects of good versus bad onboarding looks like. And, one example comes to mind a lot is that was a bit of a surprise when we talked to a lot of people is about managing the probation period. One of the challenges or one of the outcomes of designing a good onboarding process is, and getting team leaders involved, it is also identifies quickly the people who aren't right for your organization. We spoke to a number of large organizations where they had issues with their team leaders not managing that probation process in a good enough manner, and basically missing the 6-month window that you can easily exit someone out of the business without a lot of repercussions. And they'd come back to HR sort of 7 months in and say, well, this guy's really not working out, I want to get rid of them. And they're like, well, it's easier to do that, given the Fair Work Australia rules, to do it within the probation period. So I think increasing awareness of what good versus bad onboarding looks like. We recognise with team leaders as a vendor, our tools need to act like a coach for the team leader, but it needs to be just in time, easy to use tools and technology, so they're not too distracted.
Great, thanks, Pete. And one final question. What are some of the barriers that companies face in improving their onboarding process?
Look, I think, to me, some of the barriers that I think is executive involvement or support. I think onboarding is this emerging field, and it's been amazing since we launched in sort of 2012, the real rise of onboarding as a discipline, discrete to, say, recruitment or talent management. Onboarding's being recognised as a really critical phase in the employee life cycle. I think when I went back to those key metrics, talking about the return on investment or what the value of a great onboarding experience means to the business financially and culturally is really important. I always talk about, the term engagement gets thrown around a lot these days about, we need engaged employees. To me, engagement is an output or an outcome of a lot of great inputs, which is some of these pillars and principles that we've talked about, that you'll get engaged employees by looking at, applying some of those principles, and then being able to, and that engagement will then deliver to you the return on investment of reducing new hire attrition and increasing time to productivity.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. If you'd like any further information, there's plenty of content on our website which tackles the topics and issues in the employee onboarding and engagement space. Also feel free to book in an obligation-free session with one of our onboarding specialists. if you'd like to discuss anything we covered today in a little bit more depth. We will also be sending out a recording of the webinar if you'd like to go over anything you may have missed, so keep an eye out in your inboxes. And that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining in, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.